The rope around Lirelei Thornwick's neck tightened as Mayor Thurgood. Bramblestone adjusted the noose with theatrical precision, his gold teeth glinting in the harsh afternoon sun. "Ladies and gentlemen of Crimson Gulch," he bellowed to the bloodthirsty crowd, "we are gathered here to witness justice for the murder of banker Cornelius Whitehaven." Lirelei's violet eyes blazed with defiant fury despite the certainty of death choking her breath. The same wooden platform where cattle and horses were sold on market days would now claim her life. All because she'd refused Whitehaven's vile advances and he'd accidentally fallen down the stairs during their struggle. "Any last words?" Which Bramblestone sneered, his pudgy fingers caressing the lever that would drop the trapdoor beneath her feet. "I'm innocent, and you all know it," Lirelei rasped, her voice carrying across the jeering crowd with surprising strength. Her raven-black hair whipped in the desert wind as she searched the sea of hostile faces for even one sympathetic soul. The crowd's bloodlust reached fever pitch as Bramblestone raised his hand toward the lever. But before he could complete the motion, a thunderous voice cut through the chaos like a cavalry saber. "Hold your horses there, Mayor." Every head turned toward the massive figure striding through the parted crowd. Zephyr Ravencrest stood 6'6" in his weathered boots, his shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. Silver spurs jangled with each purposeful step as he approached the gallows, his steel-gray eyes fixed on the condemned woman with an intensity that made the crowd fall silent. "Mr. Ravencrest," Bramblestone stammered, his bravado cracking like thin ice, "this is a legal execution." The woman was tried and convicted by a kangaroo court that wouldn't know justice if it bit them on their collective behind. Zephyr interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "I've got something to say about this execution." Lirelei stared down at the mysterious cowboy, noting the twin colts at his hips and the controlled violence radiating from his lean frame. But something in his weathered face suggested he might be her only hope of surviving the next few minutes. "The law is the law." Ravencrest wheezed Judge Mortimer Crankshaw from his position beside the gallows. "The girl killed Whitehaven in cold blood, did she now?" Zephyr's smile was sharp as a razor. "That's interesting, considering I was having a drink with Cornelius Whitehaven not 2 hours ago at the Silver Dollar Saloon in Tombstone Creek." The crowd erupted in confused murmurs. Bramblestone's face went white as fresh snow. "Impossible. Whitehaven is dead." "We have the body, you have a body," Zephyr corrected calmly. "The question is, whose body is it really? And why were you so eager to pin its murder on Miss Thornwick here?" Judge Crankshaw's hands began to shake as he realized the implications. If Whitehaven was alive, then someone else was dead, and they were about to execute an innocent woman for a crime that might not have even occurred. "I demand you present this supposed living Whitehaven immediately," Bramblestone blustered. But his voice lacked conviction. Zephyr pulled a folded telegram from his vest pocket, the yellow paper crackling in the sudden silence. "Cornelius Whitehaven, banker of Tombstone Creek, sends his regards and wonders why. You've been using his name and reputation to terrorize the good people of Crimson Gulch." The truth hit the crowd like a lightning bolt. The man they'd known as Banker Whitehaven was an imposter, and the real victim was likely someone who discovered the deception. Lirelei had been framed by men desperate to cover their own crimes. "Gut her down," Zephyr commanded, his hand resting casually on his gun, but as trembling hands freed her from the noose, Lirelei collapsed to her knees on the platform, gasping for air and life. When Zephyr's strong arms lifted her gently from the auction block that had nearly claimed her, looked into his storm-gray eyes and saw something unexpected, not just salvation, but the promise of something infinitely more precious. The crowd dispersed like tumbleweeds in a hurricane as the truth of the deception spread through. Crimson Gulch. Zephyr carried Lirelei to the town's only doctor, Minerva Blackthorn, whose weathered hands examined the rope burns around the young woman's neck with practiced efficiency. "She'll live," Dr. Blackthorn pronounced, applying salve to the angry red welts. "But she needs rest and care." "That was too close, Zephyr. Another minute and we'd have been measuring her for a pine box." Lirelei sat on the examination table, her violet eyes never leaving Zephyr's face as he paced the small room like it caged. "Wolf, "Why did you save me?" she asked, her voice still hoarse from the noose. "You don't even know me." Zephyr paused in his pacing, his weathered features softening as he studied her delicate face. "Maybe not, but I know injustice when I see it, and I know Mayor Bramblestone's been running some kind of swindle in this town for months." "What kind of swindle?" Dr. Blackthorne asked, closing her medical bag with a sharp click. "The kind that involves fake bankers, stolen identities, and land grabs," Zephyr replied grimly. "Whitehaven, the real one, hired me to investigate when he started getting reports about loans being called in under his name. Turns out someone's been impersonating him to seize property all across the territory." Liralay's hands clenched into fists. "That monster tried to force himself on me when I went to discuss my father's mortgage. When I fought back, he fell and hit his head. I thought I'd killed him." "Probably did," Zephyr said matter-of-factly. "But you killed an imposter and a criminal, not an innocent banker. The real question is, who was he really, and who's been pulling the strings?" The answer came sooner than expected. Mayor Bramblestone burst through the doctor's door, flanked by 2 deputies with their hands on their guns. His usually florid face was pale with desperation. "Miss Thornwick is still under arrest for murder," he declared, though his voice shook with uncertainty. "Telegram or no telegram, we have a body and she's the one who killed him." "Self-defense isn't murder, Mayor," Dr. Blackthorne said coldly, "especially when the victim was attempting rape." "You have no proof of that," Bramblestone blustered. Zephyr stepped forward, his imposing frame filling the small room.
"Actually, I do."
The real Cornelius Whitehaven kept meticulous records of his business dealings. When reports started coming in about his aggressive collection methods, he began investigating. "Turns out your fake banker was really Silas McGillicuddy, a wanted man with a price on his head for fraud and assault." One of the deputies, a young man named Deputy Fairwind, lowered his gun. "Mayor, if what he's saying is true, it's not true," Bramblestone shrieked. "This cowboy is obviously lying to protect his ... his paramour." The word hung in the air like gun smoke. Liraylay felt heat rise in her cheeks, but not from shame, from indignation that this corrupt official would slander her reputation to cover his crimes. "Paramour," Zephyr's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Mayor, you just insulted a lady's honor. Where I come from, that's a shooting offense." Bramblestone's hand moved toward his gun, but Zephyr was faster. His Colt appeared in his hand. Like magic, the barrel pointing directly at the mayor's heart. "I wouldn't if I were you," Zephyr advised calmly. "I'm not just a hired investigator, Mayor. I'm also a federal marshal. And you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to attempted murder." The badge that appeared from beneath Zephyr's vest gleamed like a star in the lamplight. Deputy Fairwind immediately holstered his weapon and stepped away from his corrupt superior. "Marshal Ravencrest," the young deputy said formally. "Deputy Fairwind at your service. What are your orders?" As Bramblestone was led away in shackles, his threats and curses echoing down the street, Liraylay found herself alone with the mysterious marshal who'd saved her life. The late afternoon sun slanted through the doctor's windows, casting golden light across his rugged features. "A federal marshal," she mused, studying his face with new understanding. "Is that why you happen to be in Crimson Gulch at exactly the right moment?" Zephyr holstered his gun and turned to face her fully. "I've been tracking this fraud ring for 3 months. But I'll be honest, Miss Thornwick, I wasn't expecting to find someone like you caught in the middle of it." "Someone like me?" His gray eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Someone worth saving." 3 days later, Liraylay stood in the ruins of what had been her family's ranch, surveying the damage wrought by Bramblestone's corrupt schemes. Imposter banker McGillicuddy had foreclosed on the property illegally, then sold it to a consortium of land grabbers who'd stripped it bare before abandoning it. "It's not as bad as it looks," Zephyr said quietly, joining her beside the burned-out shell of the main house. "The land is still good, and most of the damage can be repaired." "So what money?" Liraylay asked bitterly. Everything my father worked for is gone. The cattle, the horses, even Mother's china." Her voice cracked slightly on the last words. Zephyr studied her profile in the morning light, noting the stubborn set of her jaw and the way her hands clenched into fists rather than allowing tears to fall. This woman had backbone, and he found himself increasingly drawn to her fierce independence. "There's a federal fund for victims of fraud," he offered. "You'd be entitled to compensation charity," Leroy interrupted sharply. "I don't want charity, Marshal. I want justice." "You'll have that too. Bramblestone and his associates will face trial in Denver, but that doesn't solve your immediate problem." Zephyr paused, choosing his words carefully. "You need a place to live, and you need protection. There are still members of this fraud ring unaccounted for." Leroy turned to face him fully, her violet eyes searching his weathered face. "What are you suggesting, Marshal?"
I'm suggesting.
"You let me help you rebuild. I'm suggesting you don't try to face this alone." He took a step closer, close enough that she could smell leather and sage on his clothes. "I'm suggesting that maybe we could help each other." "Help each other how?" Zephyr's jaw worked as if he were chewing on words too difficult to speak. Finally, he pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair. "Miss Thornwick, I'm 42 years old. I've spent the last 20 years chasing outlaws and fraudsters across the frontier. I'm tired of sleeping on the ground and eating beans from a can." Leroy blinked in surprise at his sudden vulnerability. "Marshal Zephyr," he corrected. "And what I'm trying to say, badly, is that I've been thinking about settling down, finding a place to call home, maybe finding someone to share it with." The implications of his words hit her like a physical blow. Are you proposing?" "To me, I'm saying that you need protection, and I need a reason to stay in one place. I'm saying that I've seen how you handle yourself under pressure, and I respect that. I'm saying that maybe we could make a good team." The relay stared at him in amazement. "Marshal Ravencrest, we've known each other for 3 days. Zephyr," he corrected again. "And sometimes 3 days of crisis tells you more about a person than 3 years of ordinary living. I know you're brave, honest, and strong enough to face down a lynch mob. That's more than most marriages start with," before Leroy could respond. The thunder of approaching hooves interrupted their conversation. A group of riders emerged from the tree line, their faces hard and their intentions clear. She recognized the leader immediately, Balthazar Grimm, Bramblestone's enforcer, flanked by 5 hired guns. Well, Grimm called out as he reined in his horse 20 yards away. "The federal marshal and his lady friend. You've caused us a lot of trouble, Ravencrest." Zephyr stepped protectively in front of Leroy, his hands hovering near his guns. "Grimm, I figured you'd crawl out from under your rock eventually. Mayor Bramblestone sends his regards from the jail cell," Grimm sneered. "He's offered $1,000 to anyone who brings him your badge and the girl's scalp." "He's in federal custody," Zephyr replied calmly. "He's not offering anyone anything." Grimm's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. "Federal custody doesn't mean much when you're dealing with federal corruption, Marshal. Bramblestone has friends in high places." Leroy felt ice form in her stomach as she realized the full scope of the conspiracy they faced. This wasn't just local corruption, it reached all the way to the territorial government, possibly beyond. "What do you want, Grimm?" Zephyr asked, though his stance suggested he already knew. "Simple trade," Grimm replied, drawing his gun with practiced ease. "The girl for your life. You can ride out of here and forget what you've seen, or you can die defending her. Your choice." Zephyr's smile was sharp as a wolf's. "I choose option 3. Before Grimm could ask what that meant, Zephyr drew both guns simultaneously, faster than thought, faster than lightning. The first shot took Grimm's gun from his hand. The second put a bullet through the hat of the man to his left. "Option 3, Zephyr said conversationally, as chaos erupted around them. "Is that you all surrender now, or I start aiming to kill instead of wound?" As gunfire erupted across the ruined ranch, Leroy realized that her life had become inextricably linked with this dangerous, mysterious marshal who fought like a demon and spoke of marriage as casually as discussing the weather. The gunfight lasted less than 5 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Leroy had taken cover behind the stone foundation of the burned house, watching in amazement as Zephyr moved through the battle like an avenging angel. His twin Colts barked continuously, each shot precisely placed to disable rather than kill. When the smoke cleared, Balthazar Grimm lay groaning with a shattered wrist. 3 of his men were unconscious from well-placed head wounds, and the remaining 2 had their hands raised in surrender. Not a single outlaw had been killed, but all were thoroughly defeated. "Impressive shooting, Marshal," called a familiar voice from the tree line. Dr. Minerva Blackthorne emerged on horseback, leading a small posse of townspeople who'd grown tired of corruption ruling their community. Doc Zephyr nodded, reloading his weapons with practiced efficiency. Perfect timing as always. "We heard the shooting from town," explained Deputy Fairwind, dismounting to help secure the prisoners. "Figured you might need backup." Lirelei rose from her hiding place, brushing dust from her simple dress. "How did you know they'd come here?" "Because desperate men make predictable choices," Zephyr replied, holstering his guns. "Grim needed to silence us before we could testify about the full extent of the conspiracy. This ranch was the logical place for an ambush." As the prisoners were loaded into wagons for transport to jail, Dr. Blackthorne approached Lirelei with a concerned expression. "Child, you can't stay out here alone. It's not safe, and there's nothing left to rebuild anyway." "I'm not alone," Lirelei said quietly, her eyes finding Zephyr's across the clearing. "The Marshal has made me an interesting proposition." Dr. Blackthorne's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "Has he now? And what kind of proposition would that be?" Before Lirelei could answer, Zephyr approached with the measured stride of a man who'd made a decision. "Thornwick, I meant what I said earlier. I'm offering you my protection, my name, and whatever future we can build together." "Your name?" Lirelei repeated, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Marry me," Zephyr said simply, his gray eyes holding hers with unwavering intensity. "Not because you have to, not because you owe me anything, but because I think we could make something good together." Dr. Blackthorne made a strangled sound of surprise. "Zephyr Ravencrest, are you proposing marriage in the middle of a crime scene?" "I'm proposing marriage in the place where Miss Thornwick nearly died for someone." "Elsa's crimes," Zephyr corrected. "Seems fitting somehow. This land took everything from her, but it also brought us together." Lirelei looked around at the ruins of her childhood home, then at the townspeople who'd rallied to their defense, and finally at the tall Marshal whose actions had saved not just her life, but her entire community. The old Lirelei would have been horrified at the idea of marrying a stranger. But the old Lirelei had died on that auction block, replaced by someone stronger, someone willing to take chances. "Yes," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the clearing. "Yes, I'll marry you, Zephyr Ravencrest." The cheer that went up from the assembled townspeople could probably be heard in the next county. Deputy Fairwind whooped and fired his gun in the air, while Dr. Blackthorne wiped tears from her eyes. "Well then," the good doctor said with a tremulous smile, "I suppose we'd better get back to town and plan a wedding. Can't have our hero Marshal and his bride standing around in ruins when there's celebrating to be done." As they rode back toward Crimson Gulch, Lirelei found herself mounted on Zephyr's horse. Sitting sideways in front of him with his strong arms around her, sensation was both thrilling and terrifying, like stepping off a cliff and discovering you could fly, having second thoughts. Zephyr murmured near her ear, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "Third and fourth thoughts," Lirelei admitted. "But not about marrying you, about whether I deserve this kind of happiness. After everything that's happened?" Zephyr's arms tightened around her protectively. "Lirelei, you survived attempted rape, false accusation, and near execution with your dignity intact. You faced down a lynch mob and armed outlaws without flinching. If anyone deserves happiness, it's you." As Crimson Gulch came into view, buildings glowing golden in the afternoon sun, Lirelei realized that sometimes the worst day of your life could lead to the best decision you'd ever make. She was going to marry a man she barely knew, but somehow that felt exactly right. The auction block where she'd nearly died would become the foundation of a new life, built on courage, trust, and the promise of love yet to bloom. The wedding took place 3 days later in Crimson Gulch's small white church, with half the territory in attendance. Word had spread quickly about the Marshal who'd exposed the fraud ring and the brave woman who'd survived false accusations. And folks had traveled from as far as Denver to witness their union. Lirelei stood before the mirror in Dr. Blackthorne's spare room, adjusting the simple white dress that the town's ladies had sewn together in record time. Her hands trembled slightly as she pinned her mother's pearl brooch to the bodice, one of the few family treasures that hadn't been sold or stolen. "You look beautiful, child," Dr. Blackthorne said softly, appearing behind her with a delicate lace veil. "Your mother would be so proud." "I hope so," Lirelei whispered, her violet eyes bright with unshed tears. "I keep wondering what she'd think about me marrying a man I've known for less than a week. She'd think you were smart enough to recognize a good man when you found one," the doctor replied firmly, securing the veil in Lirelei's dark hair, brave enough to grab hold of happiness when it offered itself. Outside the church, Zephyr paced nervously in his best black suit, a gift from the grateful townspeople. His usually steady hands fumbled with his tie until Deputy Fairwind took pity on him and fixed it properly. "Never seen you this rattled, Marshal?" the young deputy observed with a grin. "Not even when we faced down the grim gang." "Facing armed outlaws is easier than this," Zephyr admitted, running a hand through his freshly trimmed hair. "At least with outlaws, I know what I'm doing." Pastor Cornelius Devine, an elderly man with kind eyes and gentle hands, approached with the marriage certificate. "Son, are you certain about this union?" "Marriage is a sacred bond, not to be entered into lightly." Zephyr's gray eyes found the church windows, as if he could see through them to where Lirelei was preparing. "Pastor, I've spent 20 years alone, thinking that was the only way I could live. Then I met a woman brave enough to face death with dignity, and everything changed. I'm more certain of this than I've ever been of anything." The church filled rapidly with townspeople, ranchers, and even some reformed members of Bramblestone's organization who'd seen the error of their ways. The notorious auction block had been moved to the church grounds and decorated with wildflowers. It's transformed from a symbol of near death into one of new beginnings. When the ceremony began, Lirelei walked down the aisle on Deputy Fairwind's arm, having no male relatives to give her away. But she held her head high, her eyes locked on Zephyr's face as he watched her approach with an expression of wonder and fierce protectiveness. "Dearly beloved pastor," Devine began, his voice carrying easily through the packed church, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Zephyr Ravencrest and Lirelei Thornwick. It is souls who found each other in the midst of darkness and chose to walk toward the light together." The traditional words felt anything but traditional as they were spoken over this unlikely couple. When it came time for vows, Zephyr surprised everyone by setting aside the prepared words and speaking from his heart. "Lirelei," he said, his deep voice rough with emotion, "I promise to protect you not just from external threats, but from ever feeling alone or powerless again. I promise to see your strength even when you can't see it yourself, and to stand beside you as an equal partner in whatever comes next." Lirelei's own vows brought tears to half the congregation. "Zephyr, I promise to trust you with my heart. Even though trusting anyone terrifies me, I promise to build a life with you based on honesty and courage, and to never forget that you saved me not just from death, but from despair." When Pastor Devine pronounced them husband and wife, Zephyr's kiss was gentle and reverent, sealing not just their legal union, but a promise of love that neither had dared hope for. The celebration that followed spilled out into the street, musicians appearing as if by magic and tables groaning under the weight of food contributed by every family in town. As evening fell and lanterns were lit, Lirelei found herself dancing with her new husband under a canopy of stars. "Any regrets, Mrs. Ravencrest?" Zephyr asked, as he spun her around to the fiddle music. "Only that we waited 3 whole days," Lirelei replied with a laugh that sounded like silver bells. "I was ready to marry you the moment you cut me down from that gallows." As they danced, neither noticed the lone figure watching from the shadows at the edge of town, a well-dressed man with cold eyes and a telegram in his hand. Planning their destruction even as they celebrated their union, the threat came in the form of a pristine telegram delivered to their hotel room the morning after their wedding. Zephyr read it twice before his face went hard as granite, the paper crumpling in his massive fists. "What is it?" Lirelei asked, noting the sudden tension in her new husband's shoulders as he stood by the window. "Trouble," Zephyr replied grimly, handing her the yellow paper. "Big trouble." Lirelei read the telegram with growing horror. Marshal Ravencrest suspended pending investigation. Into corruption charges, returned to Denver immediately for disciplinary hearing. Wife to be arrested. A.S. accomplice. Signed, Territorial Governor Horatio Blackstone. Blackstone, Lirelay breathed. Any relation to Mayor Bramblestone's older brother? Zephyr confirmed. The corruption goes higher than we thought. Horatio's been using his position to protect the fraud ring, and now he's eliminating the threats to his operation. Before Lirelay could respond, heavy footsteps echoed in the hotel corridor outside their room. Zephyr moved instantly, positioning himself between his wife and the door as it burst open to reveal 6 federal agents with drawn weapons. Marshal Ravencrest announced the lead agent, a thin man with a waxed mustache. I'm Agent Pemberton. You're under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, and abuse of federal authority. On whose orders? Zephyr demanded, his hands held carefully away from his guns. At Governor Blackstone's direct command, Pemberton replied smugly. And Mrs. Ravencrest is charged as an accomplice to your crimes. Lirelay stepped forward, her violet eyes blazing with indignation. What crimes? My husband exposed the corruption, not participated in it. According to our investigation, Marshal Ravencrest has been taking bribes to ignore criminal activity throughout the territory. Pemberton continued, clearly enjoying his moment of power. His sudden marriage to you was an attempt to legitimize stolen funds. The accusations were so outrageous that Lirelay almost laughed. Stolen funds? Agent Pemberton, I lost everything to the fraud ring. What funds could we possibly have stolen? But Pemberton was already producing shackles, his men. Moving to surround the couple, that's when Zephyr made his decision. His hands moved with lightning speed, not toward his guns, but toward the window behind him. Hold on tight, he whispered to Lirelay, scooping her into his arms. Zephyr, what are you? Her question was answered as her husband launched them both. Through the second-story window, in an explosion of glass and splintered wood, they landed hard on the hotel's front porch roof, rolled once, and dropped to the street below just as shouts erupted from the room above. The horses, Zephyr commanded, pulling Lirelay toward the hitching post where their mounts waited. Have to get out of town now. As they galloped out of Crimson Gulch with bullets whining past their ears, Lirelay clung to her saddle horn and tried to process what had just happened. In less than 5 minutes, they'd gone from newlyweds to fugitives. From federal justice. Where are we going? She shouted over the thunder of hoofbeats. The only place where we might find allies, Zephyr replied, urging his horse toward the distant mountains. My old partner's ranch. If anyone can help us prove our innocence, it's Tobias Ironwood. They rode hard for 3 hours, finally reaching a hidden valley where a modest ranch house sat nestled among pine trees. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a tall man with graying hair emerged as they approached. Zephyr? Tobias Ironwood called out in amazement. What in blazes are you doing? Here. And who's the lady? Tobias? Meet my wife Lirelay, Zephyr said as they dismounted. We were married yesterday and became fugitives this morning. We need help. Ironwood's weathered face creased with concern as Zephyr quickly explained the situation. When he finished, the older man shook his head in disgust. Horatio Blackstone's been dirty for years, but he's been too clever to get caught, Ironwood said. However, I might have something that could help. Come inside. In the ranch house's study, Ironwood pulled out a locked strongbox and withdrew. A thick folder of documents. I've been collecting evidence of territorial corruption for the past 5 years, waiting for the right moment to act. These papers prove that Horatio Blackstone has been taking bribes from land speculators, mine owners, and railroad companies. Lirelay examined the documents with growing excitement. This proves everything. Shows how the fraud ring operated, who the real players were, and how they used fake identities to steal property. The problem, Zephyr said grimly, is getting this evidence to someone in authority who isn't already bought and paid for? Ironwood smiled for the first time since their arrival. I know just the person. Judge Temperance Fairheart in Colorado. Springs she's incorruptible and has been looking for a way to clean up territorial politics. If we can get these documents to her, they planned their next move. None of them noticed the lone rider watching the ranch from a distant hilltop, or the signal mirror flashing in the afternoon sun as their location was reported to pursuing agents. The final confrontation came at dawn in Colorado Springs. On the steps of the territorial courthouse, where Judge Temperance Fairheart had agreed to hear their evidence, but Governor Horatio Blackstone had anticipated their move. Arriving with 20 armed agents and a warrant for their immediate execution, Marshal Ravencrest, Blackstone called out, his voice echoing across the empty square. "You're surrounded. Surrender now, and I'll make your death quick." Zephyr stood protectively in front of Lirelei on the courthouse steps, his hands resting on his gun butts. "Governor, you're making a mistake. We have evidence of your crimes. Evidence." Blackstone laughed coldly. "I am the territorial authority. I decide what constitutes evidence." He gestured to his men. "Kill them both." But before the agents could draw their weapons, the courthouse doors burst open behind Zephyr and Lirelei. Judge Fairheart emerged, flanked by federal marshals from Denver who'd been investigating Blackstone for months. "Governor Blackstone," Judge Fairheart announced, her voice carrying the full weight of legal authority. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, and attempted murder." The corrupt governor's face went white as he realized he'd been trapped. "You have no authority over me?" "Actually, I do," replied a familiar voice from across the square. The real Cornelius Whitehaven stepped into view, accompanied by more federal agents. "I've been working with Judge Fairheart and Marshal Service Headquarters to expose your entire operation. The evidence that Tobias Ironwood had collected, combined with Whitehaven's banking records and the testimony of reformed gang members, painted a complete picture of the conspiracy. Blackstone had been using his gubernatorial power to protect a network of fraudsters who stole land and property throughout the territory. As Blackstone and his corrupt agents were led away in chains, Judge Fairheart approached Zephyr and Lirelei. With a warm smile, "Marshal Ravencrest, your suspension has been lifted and you're being recommended for commendation. Mrs. Ravencrest, the territorial government owes you significant compensation for your losses." But Zephyr surprised everyone by removing his marshal's badge and placing it in the judge's hands. "Your Honor, I'm resigning from federal service. I've found something more important than chasing outlaws." He turned to face Lirelei, his gray eyes soft with love. "I found a home." 6 months later, Lirelei stood on the porch of their rebuilt ranch house, watching Zephyr work with their new horses in the corral. The compensation from the territorial government had allowed them to not only rebuild her family's property, but expand it into one of the finest ranches in Colorado. "Admiring your handiwork, Mrs. Ravencrest," asked Dr. Blackthorne, joining her on the porch with a cup of coffee and a knowing smile. "Admiring my husband," Lirelei corrected, her hand resting on her slightly rounded belly, where their first child grew. "Did I ever tell you what he said when he proposed?" "What's that?" "He said maybe we could help each other." "He was right, but not in the way either of us expected." Lirelei's eyes sparkled with contentment. "I thought I needed a protector, but what I really needed was a partner, someone who saw my strength instead of my vulnerability." As if summoned by her words, Zephyr looked up from his work and waved, his smile brighter than the Colorado sunshine. In that moment, Lirelei knew with absolute certainty that the auction block where she'd nearly died had become the foundation of the most beautiful life she could have imagined. She had been bought for his bride, but she had gained so much more. Love built on mutual respect, shared courage, and the unshakable belief that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures. The townspeople of Crimson Gulch still talked about the auction block where Lirelei Thornwick had nearly met her end, but now it stood in the town square decorated with flowers, transformed into a monument to justice and second chances. Children played around it, their laughter a testament to how something meant for death could become a symbol of new life. And as the sun set over their thriving ranch, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Zephyr joined his wife on the porch. He pulled her close, his large hands gentle on her growing belly, and they watched their cattle graze peacefully in the valley below. "Any regrets about giving up the marshal's life?" Lirelei asked, leaning back against his solid chest. "Only that it took me 42 years to find you," Zephyr replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Best purchase I ever made, Mrs. Ravencrest." Lirelei laughed, the sound carrying across their land like a promise of all the joy yet to come. I wasn't for sale, Marshall. I was waiting to be claimed by the right man. As the first stars appeared, in the darkening sky, they stood together on the porch of their home, the former federal marshal and the woman who'd survived her own execution. Proof that love could bloom in the most unlikely places, and that sometimes the worst day of your life was really the first day of your forever.